Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. President Biden has asked the US Congress for $33 billion in extra support for Ukraine. Speaking at the White House, Mr. Biden called for the funding to be approved as quickly as possible. He said the package was designed to defend Ukraine rather than attack Russia.
The cost of this fight is not cheap, but caving to aggression is going to be more costly if we allow it to happen. We either back Ukrainian people as they defend their country, or we stand by as the Russians continue their atrocities and aggression in Ukraine. So we need to contribute arms, funding, ammunition, and the economic support to make their courage and sacrifice have purpose.
Mr. Biden also said he'd also put forward proposals to make it easier to seize the assets of sanctioned Russian oligarchs and use the proceeds to rebuild Ukraine. The BBC's Nomia Iqbal in Washington has this assessment.
What President Biden has effectively said today is that America's run out of money in order to help Ukraine. And he has made this request to Congress for $33 billion to keep funding Ukraine, keep the flow of weapons in Ukraine. And that would run until the end of the fiscal year. But he got it last time from Congress. They approved the package that he wanted. Will it happen this time? Unsure, because it will be an uphill battle, because at the same time, lawmakers are facing this crunch of spending fights in a worsening economy.
The Secretary-General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, has called on Russia to cooperate with the International Criminal Court in its investigations into alleged war crimes committed in Ukraine. Mr. Guterres was speaking at the site of a mass grave in Bucha. During an earlier visit to Moscow, Mr. Guterres tried to secure greater access for humanitarian aid and facilitate the evacuation of civilians from conflict zones, including Mariupol. Kira Rudik is a Ukrainian member of parliament.
The bare minimum is getting out our people from the siege city of Mariupol. I do not believe that his visit can achieve peace or can persuade Putin to stop all the atrocities in Ukraine. But the minimum that we want right now and we need right now from the world leaders, from the organizations, is to make sure that desperate people from the city of Mariupol can get out to life.
In other news, the US economy shrank unexpectedly in the first 3 months of this year. GDP declined at an annualised rate of 1.4%. Slower growth had been expected, but the figure was worse than forecast, making the first fall since the pandemic-induced recession in early 2020. A resurgence of COVID cases disrupting businesses is partly to blame. But many economists aren't worried for now, pointing out that the main causes of this slowdown are a surge in imports and a build-up in inventories. World News from the BBC. The World Health Organization has expressed concern about a rise in cases of COVID and other communicable diseases in Africa. It blamed the upsurge on a doubling of infections in South Africa. The WHO added that Africa was facing an explosion of preventable diseases due to delays in vaccinating children. Measles cases have jumped by about 400%. On Wednesday, the WHO and the UN's Children's Agency announced that measles cases worldwide surged by nearly 80% this year. Horrific testimonies are emerging from South Sudan of atrocities committed during weeks of violence. The UN has documented the deaths of more than 70 people since the end of February. At least 40,000 have fled their homes in Unity State due to communal clashes which have been blamed on cattle raiding and ethnic tensions. A mass strike in Sri Lanka has forced the closure of many schools, shops, banks and transport services across the country. More than 1,000 trade unions called the strike, demanding for the resignation of the government. Sri Lanka's facing its worst crisis since independence, with rocketing prices, a shortage of key foods and no foreign currency for vital imports. Sri Lanka's Minister of Mass Media, Nalaka Gudahewa, told the BBC the government was resolving problems one by one and would not step down.
The country has a serious economic crisis, which is a fact. People have a lot of hardships and the frustration is coming out on the streets in many ways. But that does not necessarily mean there's an uprising against the government. I mean, those are protests. So what is important at this stage is to find solutions to the problem.
Spain have been barred from the Men's Rugby World Cup next year for fielding an ineligible player. The same offence cost them a chance to take part in the last tournament in 2019. Romania will now replace them at the World Cup in France. That's the latest world news from the BBC.